Detangling a stress whirlwind in the face of a pandemic. My intentions for this project was focused on investigating the current coronavirus pandemic and how it is affecting our communities. I focused on how the public was being impacted and the stressors as well as emotions they were encountering. I interviewed a healthcare professional as well as conducted an electronic survey. Additionally, to support my findings from the survey and interview, I read through current research articles to find up-to-date information on this global situation. To begin, a pandemic is an event in which a disease spreads across several countries and affects a large number of people. COVID-19 was declared a pandemic on March 11, 2020. Coronavirus 2019 is an acute respiratory infectious disease. It has similarities to the SARS outbreak from 2003. The virus name corona was given because of the Latin meaning crown, relating to the spike-like structures protruding from the surface of the virus. Some mental health concerns associated with the pandemic are increased stress, anxiety, and depression. Stress is the combination of a stimulus that has the potential to trigger a fight-or-flight response that elicits physiological changes and results in physical, psychological, or behavioral consequences. Anxiety can be defined as an unrealistic fear that manifests itself in physiological arousal and behaviors to avoid or escape the anxiety-provoking stimulus. Lastly, depression can include, but is not limited to, a loss of interest in activities, fatigue, loss of energy, agitation, or feelings of worthlessness. A recent study with 7,236 participants concluded that anxiety was recognized to be associated with stress and reduced sleep quality during the pandemic. During this study, the participants self-reported these feelings. Additionally, another study reported that about 90% of all respondents perceived a negative impact of the coronavirus on their mental health and dignity. Considering the virus has become a global pandemic, it is unfortunate that a majority are experiencing negative effects on their mental health. The impact of stress, anxiety, and depressive symptoms can be negative. There is an abundance of research demonstrating the deleterious effects of stress and anxiety on cognitive functioning. This not only affects students, but common workers who need to keep their mind focused on the job. Many have been absorbed into the latest news updates, causing their mind to wander through the day, worrying about the pandemic and their loved ones. This mind wandering and constant need to check the news is associated with decreased academic performance, impaired work functioning, and decreased driving ability. I conducted an interview in person with a licensed clinical professional counselor at Wye Oak Therapeutic Services. Some of the questions I asked her were: are your clients experiencing more difficulties than usual? Do you feel the pandemic is increasing anxiety, sleep disturbances, or depression? And how has your practice changed? Is there a trend of increased client visits? When I conducted the interview, she gave a professional standpoint on this topic and intriguing answers. She responded there was an increase in clients, feelings of insecurity, vulnerability, anger, depression, sleep disturbances, and obesity, as many are finding ways to cope. Many are overindulging when trying to find a sense of normality. She also mentioned how the pandemic is isolating and people need the birthing and grieving rituals they would normally share with loved ones. This is creating unsettling emotions as they try to find new ways to compensate. She suggests to her clients techniques involving good self-care, exploring the changes, and how to be resilient while learning to use their strengths to realign with this change. She felt the pandemic will have lasting effects on society as a whole, but it sheds light as to what weaknesses we have in our education. It also gives opportunity to find and fix holes in our school systems. We expressed mutual concerns about children and how the pandemic is decreasing their social skills and ability to effectively communicate as they are adjusting to school at home. How are you being impacted by it? Survey results. The survey I conducted included 31 participants who answered 17 questions anonymously. There were 15 male responders and 16 female responders. The age ranged from adolescence to older adulthood. A little more than half of the participants reported that they were financially impacted, and a little under reported they were not. Of those reporting that they were financially impacted by the pandemic, 81.25% reported having their stress increase at least some, and 93.85% responded that their stress increased at least a little. This increase in financial impact appears to correlate with an increased stress level in the participants. Have you or someone close to you become infected by COVID-19? Roughly 55% responded yes and 45% responded no. There were only 2 responders who felt their stress levels have not increased since the pandemic began, 1 female and 1 male. More male participants than female participants responded that their stress levels have increased somewhat, while more female participants said their stress increased a lot. I thought these 2 charts were particularly interesting. In comparison to the previous chart, where 46% of male participants felt their stress levels had increased some, 44% of males reported in this chart that they found themselves not feeling any more anxious than before the pandemic began. When I asked, "Are you finding yourself having increased difficulty keeping in touch with others?" 61.3% of the participants said yes, and 38.7% said no. 15 out of the 19 of those who responded yes felt their anxiety had increased at least a little. The remaining 4 responded their anxiety had not increased at all since the pandemic began. During this time, it is valuable to have continued social support from friends and loved ones. Sharing feelings during stressful events is important in decreasing those feelings of anger and anxiety. The emotion that increased the most was reported to be sadness, followed by anger and fear. The participants responded that they have been coping with the pandemic and its accompanying changes through exercise, spirituality, and spending time with family. Exercise can decrease stress-related behaviors as well as increase self-esteem and decrease feelings of depression and anxiety, while devoting time to religion and spirituality also allows for social and emotional support. Finding new ways to cope with the pandemic as well as other stressors in our daily lives is something many are now noticing as more important than ever. The isolating and fearful circumstances are not over yet, but that doesn't mean it's too late to find support. In conclusion, the pandemic is something we as a community will rebound from together. The importance of self-care as well as communication beyond face-to-face conversations is something that will drive us to further advancements. Now that we are finding weak spots in our society, such as our ability to easily transmit disease, we can find ways to overcome them. Some examples of how we can reduce our stress and increase connection with others during this pandemic are sending meaningful letters to loved ones, participating in outdoor socially distant activities such as hiking and fishing, and maybe even bird watching to get our minds off the news. I would like to thank Dr. Schuette for not only her time but her investment into my project this semester and the continuous feedback she provided me.